Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello learners, welcome back to the course on AI in Human Resource Management. Over this module 5, different lectures, we have seen the importance or how AI is actually facilitating different functions, be it recruitment, be it workforce planning, be it retention. So now we'll try to discuss on the ethical considerations. What are the different ethical concerns using AI in various functions of HRM? I'm Dr. Cyril Issac. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Business, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. Now, when you look into AI, this ethical concern or the problem of morality or ethics we have touched upon in the previous module, I will try to sensitize you and I'll try to make you understand the nitty-gritties of this throughout this lecture. So let's look into each of this domain and understand what are the different ethical concerns regarding each of this domain of HRM when you are using AI into these particular domains. So let's look into ethical concerns in using AI specifically in various domains. We'll start with on a general note. When we look into, let's say, ethical concerns, it is quite evident that AI has revolutionized different functions, including, recruitment, performance management, employee engagement, etc. So the integration of artificial intelligence into HRM has been phenomenal, and we see it as a revolutionary move. However, this technological advancement raises significant ethical concerns, and that's what my plan is to address today. When we talk about these ethical concerns, we have positive aspects as well. We have some really worrying significant aspects as well. We'll discuss both. When we consider the ethical concerns specific to recruitment and hiring, we'll start with that. We have touched upon this aspect of bias before. When you look into the recruitment and hiring process, it is a critical function. There is no doubt about it. Within the human resource management, we have emphatically established that influencing the quality of an organization's workforce and its overall success, we need to have proper recruitment procedure. However, if you ask me, this process is fraught with ethical challenges that can affect both candidates and employers. So addressing these ethical concerns is vital for maintaining fairness, maintaining transparency and integrity in the hiring process. So let's understand this bias aspect, bias and discrimination. When you look into the bias in general, it can be of any form. It can be age discrimination, favoring younger candidates over older applicants based on stereotype about the age, or maybe it is preferring one gender over another for specific roles, often influenced by, let's say, again, societal norms or stereotypes for that matter. Or there might be some hiring decisions based on a candidate's race or ethnicity rather than their qualifications. So racial and ethnic discrimination can also be a significant aspect. Or the most critical one, failing to provide reasonable accommodation for candidates with disabilities. This could also be one of the critical norms of bias which we are seeing across in today's world. So when you are looking into these bias, what are the implications? Specifically, discriminatory practices not only violate legal standards but also damage an organization's reputation and hinder diversity efforts. So companies may face lawsuits, penalties, and obviously loss in public trust. So this is what we generally understand when we talk about bias. What could be the best practices? Let's also have a typical understanding of that when we are discussing about, just mere problems. We have to also look into the solutions also. Implement training programs specifically to raise awareness of unconscious bias among recruiters. That could be the first way to go ahead with. Use structured interviews and standardized evaluation criteria to ensure fairness. That could be another way to go ahead with. Promote diversity initiatives, typically to attract a broader range of candidates, can also be done. So AI can perpetuate biases present in the training data, leading to unfair hiring decisions. An example could be, let's say, exclusion of minority groups due to biased algorithm trained on the historical hiring data. So that is a possibility which we have to consider when we are blindly adopting AI for that matter. When we are looking into other ethical concerns, there could be privacy issues. We have touched upon again privacy issues in many forms. When you are looking into recruitment specifically, use of personal data from resume, from even social media access or assessments raises concerns about the consent and the misuse of data. So when you are looking into the collection and handling of personal information during the recruitment process, it typically raises significant privacy issues. So recruiters often gather sensitive data, including background checks, it could be, or social media profiles that we have seen, and even some personal references. So all these cater to some personal information. What could be the implications of this? Invasive data collection can lead to breaches of privacy, there is no doubt about it, and mistrust among candidates. So unethical handling of personal information may result in legal repercussions also under data protection law. So when you are looking into privacy issues, what could be the best practices? Let's look into that also very quickly. When you're looking into privacy issues, be transparent about what data is collected and how it will be used. That would be the primary responsibility of any organization. Obtain explicit consent from candidates before conducting background checks or collecting personal information. So this goes hand in hand with any of the research methods generally people employ. So irrespective of what you are or what work you are doing, there should be transparency with respect to when you're collecting data. Implement robust data security measures to protect candidate information. That is essential to cater or to put an end to any concerns related to privacy. Now let's look into another significant aspect or ethical concern, which is misrepresentation. Misrepresentation, if you ask me, occurs when recruiters actually provide inaccurate or misleading information about job roles, about job responsibilities or company culture. So this can, exclude some aspects, but certainly it will include exaggerating benefits or maybe something like downplaying the challenges associated with the position. So many a time they will not say the actual thing that you are supposed to get into this particular job. So misrepresentation can happen at various levels. Whatever be the role you are looking for or eyeing for, there might be some misrepresentation. Let's say we understand it from the scenario of not disclosing some particular roles, or maybe the role is displayed or role is actually defined, but what are the different issues with respect to that role, some challenges, or maybe you have to travel a lot, maybe you have to work without any particular time limit. So all these things might be an inherent aspect that is within the role. So many a time what happens is this misrepresentation actually gives you a different understanding of the whole scenario. You may think that this is the job, this is how it will be, and certainly it will not turn out. So what happens is that employee, the moment he or she is into the organization, they will feel that they have been cheated. There are some fraudulent methods that have been adopted. So in the first instance, they would want to get out. Now the problem with that is it is incurring an additional cost. There is a significant recruitment cost in the first place, but it is also incurring a certain additional cost, some level of training, some level of onboarding cost, some level of introduction into the company. That cost has gone into that particular individual. So what about that? So it is essentially misrepresentation, though it looks good in the initial level, but it certainly will be a negative aspect when you look into the long run phenomenon. Another significant aspect is the nepotism and cronyism. Let's look into this. Nepotism is in talk nowadays in a very serious connotation. Let's look into that. Nepotism typically refers to favoring, relatives or friends in hiring decisions regardless of their qualifications. So when you are looking into nepotism, the implications could be that these practices undermine the meritocracy and can lead to resentment among employees who feel that promotions or opportunities are awarded based on the relationships rather than qualification. Similarly, cronyism. We talk about that also recently. Cronyism involves similar favoritism towards friends or associates within the organization. So, what could be the best practices if you ask me? Establish clear hiring guidelines. That would be the way to go ahead that discourage nepotism and cronyism. Implement a very transparent recruitment process involving multiple decision makers to reduce bias. Encourage diversity in hiring panels to promote fair evaluations could be another way to go ahead. So these are some of the best practices that can be adopted to curb or to put an end towards nepotism or cronyism for that matter. Now let's look into ethical concerns in recruitment and hiring with respect to conflict of interest. When you look into conflict of interest, it arises when recruiters have personal relationships with candidates that could influence their hiring decisions. So, when you compromise the integrity of the recruitment process, generally you feel that this conflict of interest becomes the outcome. So, implications are serious because such conflicts can actually lead to unfair hiring practices and certainly they damage the credibility of the recruitment team. But that said, what are the best practices? We are interested to know that. When you are recruiting or you need recruiters to disclose any personal connection with candidates during the hiring process. Also, develop policies that prohibit recruiters from participating in decisions involving friends or family members or some relatives or associates, etc. Also, ensure accountability through regular audits of hiring decisions. So, these are some of the typical aspects which can actually bring a conflict of interest, and these are the best practices which can actually put an end to conflict of interest. So when you look into the recruitment, another typical significant aspect could be the social media hiring or social media screening and then hiring. Employers, if you ask me, increasingly use social media nowadays to screen candidates as part of the recruitment process. While the practice can provide insights into a candidate's personality and fit for the company culture, it also raises some ethical concerns regarding privacy, regarding the bias also. The implications again would be serious because screening candidates based on social media profiles can lead to discrimination if recruiters make judgments based on, let's say, irrelevant factors such as personal beliefs or lifestyle choices, etc. So, best practices forward could be, focus on job related criteria when evaluating the social media profiles, whichever you are supposed to evaluate. Now, establish clear guidelines for what constitutes acceptable social media screening practices. Now, that word acceptable might vary from culture to culture, but again, there has to be some significant aspect which has to be clearly underlined. So, ensure that all candidates are evaluated consistently regardless of their online presence. So, there might be a possibility that, there might be individuals who are actually, very much talented, very much skillful, but they are not so extrovert or they are not so interested in having a life in social media to put everything, to post everything, every single movement of theirs. There might be individuals who are not like that, and there might be individuals who are very keen and very active on social media. So essentially the social media clout or the social media influence you are having should not be the reason, should not be the only reason for you being appointed. Vice versa, let's look into an individual who is very talented, who is very skillful, but he is or she is not having a typical social media presence. That might not be the reason for the rejection as well. So both ways you should have a balance while screening. So when AI is doing the social media screening, there should be some human intervention, there should be some human experience involved, there should be some human intuition also coming into the act. This will make the whole process more filtered, more subtle, and more clear and effective. When you look into other ethical concerns, we have some typical issues with respect to performance management. Let's look into that. When you look into ethical concerns with respect to performance management, we'll see that performance management is again very crucial with respect to human resource management, that involves assessing employee performance, providing feedback and making decisions regarding promotions, regarding compensation and development. However, the performance management process can raise several ethical concerns that organizations must typically address to ensure fairness, to ensure the trust, to ensure the transparency. Some of the issues, we quickly look into it. The first one obviously would be confidentiality issues. When you look into confidentiality, performance evaluations often involve sensitive information about employee performance and behavior. So, maintaining confidentiality is vital. It is essential to protect the employee privacy. If your performance parameters is out in the public, it can be used against you, even if it's positive, even if it's negative. Negative, there is no need for any explanation. Even if it's positive, people may try to downplay it, people may try to undermine it, people may try to bypass it, or somehow try to recreate or reinterpret the whole results typically. Another significant aspect with respect to confidentiality would be the implications, the breaches of confidentiality, which can actually lead to mistrust among employees and legal repercussions for the organization. So, employees may be reluctant to share honest feedback if they fear their comments will not be kept confidential. So, the moment the feedback system breaks down, the moment the feedback system cracks, the problem is that you will not find the trust quotient within the organization. There will be a distrust loop which will be developed, and every now and then every single individual will try to have a certain level of distrust with either the boss or the colleague or the subordinate for that matter. What could be some of the mitigation strategies? When we think about it, we can definitely come out with some strategies like, let's say, establish clear policies regarding the handling of performance data to ensure the confidentiality. Limit access to evaluation results to authorized personnel only. And also do communicate the importance of confidentiality to all the stakeholders involved in the evaluation process. Now, another significant aspect could be the pressure to achieve targets. When you are looking into this pressure, this is nothing but employees may face this pressure from management to meet specific performance targets or metrics, which is not new. Each one of you who is associated with any organization and is listening to me today will definitely vouch for this, that there will be, and there definitely is some sort of pressure. Only thing is that it varies in degree. Some might be feeling high pressure, some of the organization might not be giving that much of pressure, or some might be very consistent in taking pressure. So all these slight differences, subtle differences might be there, but the fact of the matter is that there is and there will be pressure to achieve targets always. So this pressure can lead individuals to engage in unethical behavior. It could be something like manipulating data or cutting corners to achieve the desired results. The implications again are severe. Such practices, such issues or such typical behavior can undermine the organizational integrity and lead to serious ethical violations. When employees feel compelled to compromise their values for the sake of meeting targets, it can create a toxic workplace culture. So we do have some of the mitigation strategies. If you think about it, set realistic and achievable performance goals. There's no harm in doing that. Always try to set achievable and realistic performance goals that will align with the ethical standards. Try to foster a culture that values integrity over mere results by recognizing the ethical behavior as a key component of performance evaluations, and typically provide support and resources for employees struggling to meet targets without resorting to unethical practices. Another significant ethical concern with respect to performance management would be the inconsistent evaluation standard. The word inconsistent is pretty relevant and consistent across different organizations. If you ask me, inconsistencies in how evaluations are conducted across different departments or teams can lead to perceptions of unfairness among employees. So, variations in standards. It may arise from differing managerial styles or lack of training. What could be the implications? Inconsistent evaluations can typically foster resentment among employees who feel that they are not being held in the same standards, or they are held in different standards than their peers. So this particular perception can damage team cohesion and overall morale. So when you look into the inconsistent evaluation standards, let's think about some of the mitigation strategies, like what we do in case of other different points also. Develop a standardized evaluation form and process that all managers must use this particular form, or some standardization in terms of the evaluation parameters. Provide training for managers on how to conduct fair and consistent evaluations, and also what I can think of is regularly review evaluation outcomes across departments to identify the discrepancies and address them promptly. This could actually bring some consistency in the evaluation standards. Now let's look into the feedback. We have seen how the feedback may get compromised because of the pressure to achieve targets, and they might stay silent. So let's look into the feedback, specifically the feedback quality. When you talk about the quality of feedback provided during performance evaluation specifically, please note it is critical for employee development. There is no denying the fact. Feedback should be constructive, feedback should be specific, feedback should be focused on behaviors that can be changed or improved. So the implications would be poor quality feedback, let us say something like vague comments. Vague comments typically, or overly critical assessments can demotivate employees and hinder their professional growth. So effective feedback is essential. Effective feedback is vital for fostering a culture of continuous improvement. Now, when you look into the mitigation strategies with respect to the feedback, we see that we can typically train managers on how to deliver effective feedback that emphasizes strengths while addressing the areas of improvement. So there should be a level of motivation that is kept high. Encourage a two-way feedback process where employees can share their perspectives on their evaluations, and also please try to set aside time for regular check-ins, including check-in for managers as well as employees. It could be outside your formal appraisal period. There is a performance appraisal and there is specific time allotted to that. If you are doing the feedback mechanism again within that time zone, it will be treated as a routine process of performance evaluation. Rather than doing that, we can always have a typical specific time outside, a dedicated time slot for taking up the feedback, and that would be the better way to go ahead with. Now, another significant possibility, and I would say the final one I'll discuss with respect to performance management, would be the bias in evaluation. We have looked into the inconsistent evaluation standards, but we are now looking into the bias in evaluation. And this is real. AI algorithms may favor certain behavior or metrics over others disadvantaging some employees. Now, bias in performance evaluations can typically stem from various sources. It could include some unconscious bias, some favoritism, some systemic discrimination based on gender, based on race, based on age, or other protected characteristics. So, these typical problems, these typical issues or biases can lead to unfair assessments that do not accurately reflect an employee's performance in a right way. When you look into the implications, please note, employees perceive that evaluations are biased, and if that perception is there, it can typically lead to decreased morale. There is no doubt about it. It can lead to increased turnover rates and even potential legal challenge. So, according to a survey by the Society for Human Resource Management, 62% of the employees feel that the performance evaluation process is biased in some way. Now, considering the seriousness of this issue, let's look into some possible mitigation strategies. One I can think of would be implement standardized evaluation criteria to minimize the subjectivity, which we have seen before. Conduct bias awareness training for our managers to help them recognize and mitigate their biases. We need to talk up. We need to be transparent in this. Okay, there is bias. We have to address this. We have to, take it in the front face itself. So use 360-degree feedback systems that incorporate input from multiple sources. It includes peers, it could include subordinates, it could include supervisors to provide a more balanced view of performance. Now let's look into the ethical concerns in employee engagement and retention. Employee engagement and retention, as you know, as we have seen in the previous lecture, they are critical components of organizational success. However, ethical concerns in these areas can significantly impact an organization's culture, employee satisfaction, and even to a great extent the overall performance. So let's look into what are the different ethical concerns. The first and the foremost one definitely would be fairness and transparency. What do we mean by this? We have seen it across different lectures now. Fairness in organizational practices might be new to us. Fairness in organizational practices is vital for fostering trust and loyalty among employees. So, transparency in communication about policies, about performance evaluations, about promotions, even about compensation is vital to ensure that employees feel valued, they feel respected. So, many a time what happens is that the implications are severe. A lack of transparency, if you ask me, can typically lead to perceptions of favoritism, can lead to perceptions of discrimination, eroding the trust in the organization, the trust in the leadership itself. Research studies indicate that the organizations with transparent practices, they experience higher levels of employee engagement. So, when we look into employees who perceive unfairness, it can lead to disengagement. It is evident it can lead to increased turnovers. Now, let's look into the mitigation strategies. Some of the possible mitigation strategies which we can think of would be clearly communicate the policies and procedures related to performance management, related to promotions, related to compensation. Be very fair, be very transparent with respect to the organizational policies, with respect to the organizational rules, regulations, procedures, etc. If there is some level of ambiguity, there is some level of uncertainty, then there might be an issue with respect to transparency, then there might be issue with respect to fairness. Also, think of situations where you can involve employees in decision-making process that were appropriate to enhance. Involve employees in decision-making process where appropriate to enhance their sense of ownership. That is also vital. Let them get a belongingness. Let them get an idea that this organization also belongs to them. You belong there. That itself would actually motivate them. Also, try to regularly solicit feedback from employees on the organizational practices and make adjustments based on their input. Another significant ethical concerns in the employee engagement retention parameter would be respectful treatment. What do you mean by respectful treatment? It encompasses everything. How employees are treated by their peers and supervisors. This could also include something like recognizing contributions, valuing diverse perspectives, and even creating an inclusive environment. So the implications would be, if there is no respectful treatment or there is disrespectful behavior, such as, let's say, workplace bullying or harassment, it can lead to decreased morale, it can lead to increased turnover. So a study found that respectful treatment is one of the most significant contributors to job satisfaction. And being a researcher myself in counterproductive organizational place behaviors, especially something like knowledge hiding, I can typically vouch for this. When employees feel disrespected or undervalued or undercommunicated, they are more likely to disengage from their work or leave the organization. So many a time we have to think of strategies which need to circumvent, which need to bypass this. So what about trying to establish a zero tolerance policy for disrespectful behavior and harassment? That could be the first and the foremost way to go ahead. There could be also a possibility of providing training on diversity, equity, and inclusion to promote a respectful workplace culture, and also try to encourage open communication channels where employees can voice concerns about the treatment without fear of retaliation. Another significant aspect would be ethical leadership. When you look into ethical concerns typically in employee engagement and retention, ethical leadership emerges as one of the significant concerns, because ethical leadership plays a vital role in shaping employee engagement and retention. Leaders who demonstrate integrity, leaders who demonstrate fairness, accountability, they set the tone for organizational culture. And please note, employees are more likely to be engaged when they perceive their leaders as ethical. Conversely, unethical leadership behaviors can lead to distrust, it can lead to disengagement. So research shows that 94% of the employees consider it critical that their organizations operate ethically. So this percentage itself shows the relevance of this, or the significance of ethical leadership, which indicates a strong connection between ethical leadership and employee engagement. So again, if you think about some of the strategies, to increase ethical leadership or to mitigate the ethical concerns in employee engagement with respect to ethical leadership, please try to train leaders on ethical decision making and the importance of modeling ethical behavior. Create mechanisms for leaders to receive feedback from employees about their leadership style, and typically create or recognize and reward ethical behavior among leaders to reinforce its importance within the organization. Another significant aspect when we discuss the ethical concerns in employee engagement would be the employee activism. What do you mean by this? In recent years, if you look into organizations specifically, employees have become increasingly vocal about their values and expectations regarding the workplace ethics. So employee activism can manifest, if you ask me, in various forms, including something like protest against the company policies or practices perceived as unethical. Organizations that typically ignore employee concerns risk losing top talent and damaging their reputation. So a significant percentage of employees reported leaving organizations due to disagreements with management's ethical stance. If you think about some of the strategies or some of the mitigation strategies explicitly to actually mitigate this ethical concern, please try to establish channels for employees to express their opinions on ethical issues without fear or without retaliation. Without fear of retaliation. So actively listen to employee feedback regarding company policies and practices, and also try to demonstrate responsiveness by making changes based on employee input wherever feasible. Another significant concern would be workplace politics, and this is critical because workplace politics often involves maneuvering for power or influence within an organization. So this can lead to unethical behaviors. It could be something like favoritism or manipulation that undermines the trust among employees. So when workplace politics dominate an organization's culture, it can create a toxic environment that drives away engaged employees. So employees may feel compelled to engage in similar behaviors to survive or succeed within the organization. What are the different strategies? You can promote a culture of collaboration over competition by recognizing, the team achievements rather than individual accomplishments. That could be done. Or think of, implementing clear policies regarding conflict resolution to address workplace disputes constructively. Or even think of possibilities regarding encouraging transparency in decision-making process related to promotions and rewards. So some of the critical aspects could actually mitigate the ethical concerns with respect to workplace politics. And finally, with respect to employee engagement retention, you will have the recognition practices also emerging as a concern. When you look into recognition programs, they are essential for boosting employee engagement. However, if not implemented ethically, please note, they can lead to perceptions of unfairness, they can lead to perceptions of favoritism. So if recognition is perceived as biased or inconsistent, it can demotivate employees who feel overlooked or typically undervalued. So ethical recognition practices contribute positively towards employee morale and retention. So what we see is that if we want to overcome these inconsistencies or the problems concerning recognition practices, we have to bring up some strategies. And the strategies like, let's think about developing some clear criteria for recognition programs that are communicated transparently across the organization, or ensure that the recognition is based on, let's say, some measurable performance metrics altogether, rather than mere personal relationships or associations, or regularly review recognition programs for fairness and effectiveness based on employee feedback. Now, these are some of the ethical concerns with respect to employee engagement retention. Now, we'll move on to training and development. Another significant, domain of human resource management. I've seen how AI has typically increase the possibility of training, how it is trying to make it personalized, how it is trying to bring about the clear objectivity of training and increasing the effectiveness of training altogether. We have a lot of ethical concerns. We look one by one, from favoritism and bias. If you ask me, many a time what has happened is that the training program was not given for some time, or was never a priority of organization. But what has happened is, with the advent of AI, sometimes with respect to the trained data, the biasness in the trained data, sometimes some favoritism may creep in. Sometimes some issues may come out where you'll see that the bias is there and people would be focusing only on a selected or a chosen few. And this typically creates a problem of favoritism. This preferential treatment actually emerges as an ethical concern in training programs. Let's look into how we can mitigate those training programs typically, mitigate the concerns related to training programs typically. When you are looking into the favoritism and bias aspect, as I mentioned, how we can actually look into the preferential treatment. When we are thinking of favoritism and bias, please note, favoritism is perceived, and if it is perceived in a wrong way, it can create a toxic work environment. The moment you are in an organization and you feel that, okay, you are not getting the benefit, or let's say you are talented, you are skillful, but the higher management is not rewarding you. Instead, it is giving the merit, or let's say the promotions or the recognition to somebody else who is less qualified, or maybe not as good as you, at least according to you, then you will have a problem. So when this is perceived, it can create a toxic work environment. It can lower the morale. It can increase the turnover rates. A survey conducted by Society for Human Resource Management found that 73% of HR professionals have encountered ethical dilemmas related to favoritism in training programs. So it is vital for us to look into some of the possible mitigation strategies. One which I can think of definitely would be to establish a clear criteria for selecting employees for training programs based on employee assessments of skills and competencies. Another could be to implement a transparent nomination process that allows all employees to apply for training opportunities, and also regularly review the training participation data to identify and address any disparities. Another significant concern would be the misrepresentation of training program. When you have, let's say, some ethical dilemmas that can come up when training providers misrepresent their credentials or the effectiveness of their programs to secure contracts or to gain competitive advantage. So this could include, let's say, exaggerating the outcome or falsely claiming the accreditation. All these we see in industry nowadays. Misrepresentation can undermine trust between organizations and training providers, leading to ineffective training programs, period. So according to Corporate Executive Board, CEB, so what are the different mitigation strategies that could actually curb the misrepresentation of training programs? One I can think of would be to conduct thorough due diligence when selecting the training providers, verifying the credentials and track records. Another could be require transparency from vendors regarding their methodologies and expected outcomes. Another could be to establish contracts that include clauses for accountability regarding the quality of training delivered. When we look into the ethical concerns in training and development, we have to also understand the lack of inclusivity emerging as a significant aspect. Training programs must be designed to be inclusive. They must be designed to be accessible to all employees, regardless of their background, regardless of their gender, race, or other characteristics. So a lack of inclusivity can lead to feelings of alienation among underrepresented groups. So what are the implications? When employees feel excluded from development opportunities, it can typically hinder their engagement and career progression. A study published in the Journal of Business Ethics, it found that 48% of the employees believe that organizations do not handle training practices ethically. Now, this is a singularly a big concern. When you look into such concerns, we also have to think of some of the possible recommendations or solutions or mitigation strategies. One could be ensure that the training content reflects diverse perspectives and is relevant to all employee demographics totally, or provide accommodations for employees with disabilities or maybe some special needs to ensure equal access to training, or even solicit feedback from diverse employee groups to improve the inclusivity of the training program. So this typical information, this typical understanding would ensure you as a training provider, you as a facilitator to have a more inclusive approach in all your programs. Another significant concern in case of training and development is the confidentiality issue. What is this? Training often involves sharing sensitive information about employees' performance or personal experiences. So when you are maintaining confidentiality, it is good. Maintaining confidentiality becomes vital to protect employee privacy. Breaches of confidentiality can definitely lead to mistrust among employees, and it discourages open participation in training programs. Again, we have to, if you are part of such organization positions, establish clear policies regarding confidentiality during training sessions. Communicate the importance of confidentiality to both the parties, both the trainers as well as the participants, and if possible utilize anonymous feedback mechanisms where appropriate to encourage honest sharing without fear of any sort of exposure. That could actually prevent these concerns. Another significant ethical concern with respect to training and development is the quality of the training content. Many a time ethical concerns arises when organizations provide outdated or sometimes irrelevant materials that do not align with the current industry standards. So poor quality training can lead to ineffective skill development. There cannot be any doubt in that, resulting in decreased employee performance and satisfaction. So employees may feel frustrated if they perceive that the time is being wasted on inadequate training. So what could be the some of the strategies which we can think of? Regularly review and update the training materials to ensure that they reflect the current best practices and the industry standards, or involve subject matter experts in development of training content, or gather participant feedback after each session to assess the relevance and the effectiveness of the materials used. And finally, one of the most significant ethical concern with respect to training and development would be the pressure to participate. And what is this? Employees may feel pressure to participate in voluntary training programs, to perceive expectations from management, or fear of negative consequences if they opt out. So when you are looking into clearly communicating participation in certain trainings, that would be the way to go ahead. Emphasize the value of voluntary engagement. Foster a culture that encourages self-directed learning rather than mandatory attendance. That would be a long way to go ahead. So many a time you see people are just there for the sake of attendance. You go to any training program, people from organizations may actually validate this particular claim. You go to any particular training program within an organization, you see people are there only to ensure the attendance. And as a trainer also, I've seen in many of the online programs, there are a certain set of people who are there only to showcase that they were present. So sometimes they will ask some trivial questions only to make a mark that they were present, or just to establish, just to have a alibi or a proof that this particular session I was involved, or I was there, or I was participating. So many a time this becomes redundant. So rather than that, some typical measures to actually objectively capture the participation, or sometimes something as critical as some incentivizing some particular individuals. Let's say you attend this training, some sort of gamification elements can be brought in, or some sort of training can be done, so that people are also very much interested in coming in and attending the particular program. So many a time this could also actually come out as a good way to go ahead with. Now let's look into the ethical concerns with respect to workforce planning and analytics specifically. When you are looking into workforce planning and analytics, you see that there are some concerns with respect to the data privacy and confidentiality, bias, etc. Most of them we have already touched upon, so I will not take much time here. But please understand, workforce planning and analytics are critical functions in human resource management. We do not have a difference in opinion there. It would involve forecasting future staffing needs, analyzing employee data, and making informed decisions to optimize the workforce effectiveness. However, these processes can raise significant ethical concerns, and these are some of them. First one, very quickly, when you look into data privacy and confidentiality, please note, workforce analytics often involves the collection and analysis of sensitive data. So breaches of data privacy can lead to mistrust among employees. There could be some potential legal repercussions also under the GDPR rule or regulations like that, and even damage to the organization's reputation is also quite possible. So very quickly, when we look into the mitigation strategies, we can think of, let's say, one could be to implement a robust data security measure. Two could be to clearly communicate to employees what data is collected, how it will be used, who has access to it, all the relevant data or all the relevant information associated with the data can be shared. Or three, obtain explicit consent from the employees before collecting or analyzing their personal data. So these are some of the possible ways to mitigate the data privacy and confidentiality concern. Another significant such concern would be the bias and data interpretation. Again, the same thing but in a different way. We see that biased data interpretation can lead to discriminatory practices, maybe in terms of workforce planning. promotion, talent management, etc. So please try to regularly audit the data sources for bias and ensure that data sets used for analysis are diverse, they are representative, use algorithms designed to mitigate bias in decision making process, involve the diverse teams in development and implementation of analytic tools to provide varied perspectives. Transparency in decision making also would be a concern here. A lack of transparency, as I already mentioned, can lead to distrust among employees regarding how the decisions are typically made. So when employees do not understand the criteria used for promotions or layoffs, it can create a perception of unfairness, it can create a lot of disengagement. So clearly outline the criteria used for decision making in workforce planning. Please do provide regular updates to employees about changes in workforce strategy based on analytics finding, based on understanding of the data, and also encourage open dialogue about how data driven decisions are made and allow employees to ask questions or voice concerns. Significant aspect, another one would be employee surveillance. Many a time employees may feel that their privacy is invaded if they believe that they are being constantly monitored, and this can lead to decreased morale, this can lead to increased stress levels, and even a toxic work environment where employees feel mistrusted. Why you are actually monitoring? Why you are actually keeping a check? Why you are breathing down the neck every single time? Because there is some level of distrust that is there. There is some level of insecurity that is there. So all these aspects are going to create our serious ethical concerns typically with respect to workforce planning and analytics. When you are looking into such situations or scenarios, establish a clear policy regarding the monitoring practices. Try to circumvent this, try to come out of this, communicate openly with employees about what is being monitored and why it is necessary for the organizational success. If you cannot put it in writing, if you cannot communicate this explicitly, I don't think there should be any surveillance at all. Focus on outcomes rather than micromanaging processes. Trust employees to manage their own work effectively. Another significant ethical concern in workforce planning would be equity in training opportunities. Workforce planning often involves identifying training needs based on performance analytics, and when you are looking into these training opportunities, if they are not equitably distributed, it can hinder career advancements for underrepresented groups within the organization. So this inequity can perpetuate disparities in career progression and employee engagement. So please try to ensure that the training needs assessments are conducted fairly across all employees' demographics. Monitor participation rates in training programs to identify any disparities among different groups, and foster an inclusive culture by actively encouraging all employees to pursue development opportunities. Another significant aspect could be the accountability. And when you talk about accountability, if decisions based on the workforce analytics leads to layoffs or other adverse outcomes without clear accountability, it can damage the trust between employees. It can damage the trust between employees and management altogether. So when you can establish a clear line of accountability, let's say for decisions made based on workforce analytics, please try to involve HR professionals in interpreting data insights to ensure that human factors are considered in decision-making process. And finally, provide avenues for employees to appeal decisions or seek clarifications regarding how analytics influence outcomes. And when you look into the strategies to address these ethical concerns, please note we have a whole list of them. Again, this might not be an exhaustive one, but I've tried to provide most of the possibilities. Use standardized questions and evaluate criteria to ensure consistency and fairness in candidate assessments. Always provide training on unconscious bias and importance of diversity to hiring managers specifically. Also, ensure AI decisions are explainable and provide employees with clarity on how algorithms typically work. offer a regular ethics training that includes real world scenarios relevant to the workplace generally. Please do conduct audit the AI tools to identify and mitigate biases in, if any, there are in algorithms or data sets for that matter. Please do obtain informed consent before collecting and analyzing the employee data, typically with respect to the different training programs or even recruitment or other streams of human resource management. So combine the AI insights with human judgment to make a balanced decision, not a lopsided decision, but a balanced decision. You need both. You need the AI decision as well as the human intuition. So 360-degree feedback systems, please do incorporate feedback from multiple sources. It could be peers, it could be subordinates, it could be supervisors, for a comprehensive view of performance. Provide training on recognizing biases and delivering constructive feedback immediately and effectively, and also create policies to govern AI use in HR, regularly train the HR professionals on ethical AI practices. So to conclude, ethical use of AI in HR requires striking a balance between technological advancement. When you look into the entire session, I have tried to emphasize on one particular thing, that is human intuition, human experience is as vital as the AI introduction. So many a time we see that AI as a panacea, as a solution to everything. Please do not consider like that. AI can typically facilitate things, but there should be a right balance. As I mentioned, there should not be a human oversight. There should not be a situation where human beings are not involved also. So many times there could be experience related solutions, and this will typically make the decision making more stronger. You have the data helping you with the analytics, with the decision from the technology angle, and you are mixing it with, you are clubbing it with the human intuition, human experience. That will be the better way to go out. So all the ethical concerns we have gone detail in a systematic way with respect to each and every function of human resource management. If you see this particular module, this is one of the most important module within the entire course curriculum, because we have seen how AI is facilitating each of the different domains. Some of the leftover domains we'll discuss in the coming modules, but that or those modules which we have seen, I've tried to give a summary with respect to the ethical concerns. We have seen how the ethical concerns are pretty much relevant in each of these domains. We have looked into the implication part of these particular concerns. We have also looked into the possible mitigation strategies. Again, these are not exhaustive. These are with respect to my understanding, my experience and my reading of the literature. I'm just mentioning about the possible mitigation strategies. As the systems evolve, as the technology evolve, there could be more and more of critical, new mitigation strategies that could come up. But at this point in time, we have to keep a balance between the human experience and the AI technology. That's all from today's class. We'll come up with more details in the coming modules. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.